Hello viewers, it's me Kulsub Ahmed. Today I'm here with the topic, how does COVID-19 put global economies into recession? World history speaks how the global economy has suffered in the past. With contractions in per capita GDP, world has experienced 14 global recessions since 1870. Out of them, Great Depression of 1930 was the top hit. That lasted for 3 years from 1930 till 1932. Then we had recession after World War II that happened in 1945 to 46. And then we had 2009 stock market crash, and now in 2020 we have coronavirus pandemic.
Around the world, economies are crumbling. Since the coronavirus outbreak, the price of every vital commodity has fallen.
We're seeing a lot of these markets hit.
Coronavirus has oil below $50 a barrel. U.S. demand in China has dropped off substantially.
You're impacting the demand for copper, iron ore, even gold is going down.
America's Department of Labor has recorded the highest ever number of new unemployment claims in the past 2 weeks, just under 10 million.
Governments had modelled the impact of a pandemic on their economies, but were in no way prepared. The indication is that economic activity has been sledgehammered in the course of a couple of years.
Just how deep is the crisis for the world economy?
The COVID-19 recession will be the deepest than Great Depression and worse than World War II recession, and folding than 2007-9 global financial crisis. Usually during crisis, economies disperse more fiscal injections, but here we ask people to stay home, don't go out for work, means no work, no output. This will push the economies further down, resulting negative multiplier effect. Let's see how what behaves in coronavirus epidemic. Let's discuss economic conditions that we have been stating in last diagram. We do hear about economic slowdown, recession, and depression. Now let's see what are these three things. The economic slowdown happens when our GDP growth, means gross domestic product growth, is slows down. It is less for 1, 2, 3, 4 years. So we will call it economic slowdown. Then we have economic situation, that is recession. We have recession when our GDP growth rate is negative for 2 quarters or more than that. We will call it a recessionary situation in the economy. Then we have depression in the economy, that is the extreme situation when we have negative 10% or more or less GDP growth rate for 3 years or more than that. We will call it a depression. So depression can also happen in the economies. It happened in last 150 years for once. That was known as 1930s Great Depression. So it happened in last 50 years once it happened, and it lasted for 10 years. So the Great Depression was worst economic downturn in the history of industrialized world, lasting from 1929 to 1939. It began after the stock market crash of October 1929, which sent Wall Street into a panic and wiped out millions of investors. It was the longest, deepest, and most widespread depression of the 20th century. The Great Depression is commonly used as an example of how intensely the global economy can decline. So let's see what happened, what economic impairments were done because of Great Depression.
The Great Depression was a global economic upheaval from 1929 to 1940. It was manifest by a sharp decline in business activity, high unemployment, and deflation. The peak of unemployment was 28% in 1933. GDP fell 15%, and international trade declined 50%. Industrial production fell 46% from 1929 to 1932. Wholesale prices decreased 32% between 1929 and 1932. Individual fortunes were wiped out. For example, the founder of GM lost everything in the market crash. However, these are numbers. They cannot accurately represent the hardship of the time when compared to our standards of living today. A sequence of events marked the Great Depression.
let's discuss the sequence of events that caused Great Depression. The first thing that happened was the stock market crash. It was a situation when a person, the founder of GM company, lost all of his shares in the stock market. So when we have stock market crash, it is the indication that business activity is going to work negatively, or it is not effective or efficient. Then we have commodity prices crash, like there was a decline or deflation in the prices of the products, and deflation happens when demand goes down, means supply is available in the market but people are not willing to buy the products because they just feel that it's better to not to do the purchasing. And then we had the third incident, that was the credit market crash. There was a drop in demand of credit because people, the investors, they did not want to have more money with them because they found that it is of no benefit for them because business activity is slowing down as there is no demand in the market, so they need not to bring supply into the market. So this was also the situation. Then we had business slowdown, so a sharp decline in business activity resulting massive unemployment, and unemployment means there is no demand because people don't have money, and when there is no demand means there is no supply. When there is no supply, there is no production. When there is no production, you don't need to hire people, rather you will be downsizing the people. And if you will be downsizing the people, it means you are further creating more unemployment, and further there is less demand of products because people won't have money with them. So a very pathetic condition is going to happen in the economy, and this is quite discouraging, and this is quite not good for the country, health of any country. Then we have Covid-19, a pandemic. Coronavirus pandemic. Let's see how managing director of IMF explains about coronavirus, how the virus is behaving in the world.
You've called this crisis a crisis like no other. Give us a sense of the scale as you see it.
Well, it is the worst crisis since the Great Depression, but it is more than that, because it is a combination of a health crisis and an economic shock. Normally in a crisis we will boost spending. Now we are telling people don't go out, don't spend. Secondly, it is truly global. Just 3 months ago we were projecting 160 economies to have positive income per capita growth. Now we are projecting 170 economies to have negative per capita income growth. And on top of it, it has tremendous uncertainty on how we are going to get out of this crisis, cross on the other side, because we depend on something that we don't yet quite know, and it is the coronavirus itself.
And that uncertainty is the really difficult part of it, isn't it? For those like you so used to panic.
During coronavirus pandemic, lockdowns were imposed throughout the globe to curb coronavirus spread, and all economic activities were restricted, resulting in reverse impacts on the both demand and supply side of the labor market. International meetings and games were postponed, and in particular, the crisis is pushing many families into extreme poverty, resulting inequalities. Since the start of crisis, growth projections of this year have been slashed across the board. Coronavirus pandemic hit hard the global economy. Now we had regional economic vulnerabilities, like we had global trade restrictions, we had tourism industry was stopped and banned, and commodity exports were not being done, and external financing was not being done. So all these things are going to ultimately cause more, you can say, negative multiplier effect in the economy and more economic societal problems for the country. So coronavirus hits hard the global economy. As per the World Bank forecast, the first thing that will happen is World Bank forecast the global economy will shrink by 5.2% this year. Then we had world will face deepest recession since World War II, as I discussed before. Then we had advanced economies is anticipated to shrink by 7% in 2020 as domestic demand and supply, trade and finance have been severely disrupted. Then we had economies experiencing decline in per capita output since 1870. So all these things are going to have adverse impacts on the economies. Then World Economic Outlook by World Bank. Emerging markets and developing economies are expected to shrink by 2.5% this year. Their first contraction as a group in the last 60 years. This is really pathetic. Then per capita incomes are expected to decline by 3.6%, which will tip millions of people into extreme poverty. So what are the IMF forecasts? So IMF has calculated that overall growth per capita is declining, and you can see since 1980 till date how the growth has been declining, and during this year we are going to expect there would be 6.2% per capita growth, negative growth of per capita. So this will happen. Now, how to tackle the pandemic? As explained by IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgia, how she explains that how can we take out the economies from this massive problematic situation. So what can we do, and how can we bring out the economies out of this situation?
The human costs of the coronavirus pandemic are already immeasurable, and all countries need to work together to protect people and limit the economic damage. This is a moment for solidarity, which was a major theme of the meeting today of the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors. There I emphasized 3 points. First, the outlook for global growth. For 2020, it is negative, a recession at least as bad as during the global financial crisis or worse. But we expect recovery in 2021. To get to it, it is paramount to prioritize containment and strengthen health systems everywhere. The economic impact is and will be severe, but the faster the virus stops, the quicker and stronger the recovery will be. We strongly support the extraordinary fiscal actions many countries have already taken to boost health systems and protect affected workers and firms. And we welcome the moves of major central banks to ease monetary policy. These are bold efforts. They are not only in the interest of each country, but of the global economy as a whole. And even more will be needed, especially on the fiscal front. My second point is that advanced economies are generally in a better position to respond to the crisis, but many emerging markets and low-income countries face significant challenges. They are badly affected by outward capital flows, and domestic activity will be severely impacted as countries respond to the epidemic. Investors have already pulled $83 billion from emerging markets since the beginning of the crisis, the largest capital outflow ever recorded. And we are particularly concerned about low-income countries in that distress, an issue on which we are working closely with the World Bank. Third, what can we, the IMF, do to support our members? We are concentrating bilateral and multilateral surveillance on this crisis and policy actions to temper its impact. We will massively step up emergency finance. Nearly 80 countries are requesting our help, and we are working closely with the other international financial institutions to provide a strong, coordinated response for largest possible impact. We are replenishing the Catastrophe Containment and Relief Trust to help the poorest countries.
IMF wants to use full lending capacity of $1 trillion. IMF vows to strengthen health system of the entire world. and they emphasis on major central banks to ease monetary policy so that the investors could have confidence, they could have more money with them, and they could bring injections into the economy. Then investors have pulled out $83 billion out of emerging economies, so this is to be compensated. Then emergency funds to be disbursed in wake of COVID-19. Then issuance of relief trust to poor countries will be done by IMF or World Bank. So this was all about my video. If you liked my video, please like, share and subscribe my channel. Thank you.